Hello everyone and welcome to the Fly Racing GNCC post-race show here on digitaloffroad.com. Jason Hooper here bringing you the call for the show, and it's going to be a little bit different format. We had some bad weather at the end of this race. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but ended up not being able to film last night, so it's just Hoop here going to give you a little rundown on what went down at the beautiful Snowshoe Resort here in Snowshoe, West Virginia. As everybody knows, this is one of the toughest races on the circuit by far. You know, long laps, crazy start on the road, and definitely some of the gnarliest conditions with rocks, uphills, downhills, mud pits, and you know, historically we've had guys like Nate Canny, who won last year and has been on the podium the past few years and is a contender. You know, Thad Duvall almost won as a XC2 lights rider, and then we have guys like Josh Strang who have yet to finish on the podium at Snowshoe. As you guys can see here, the rain started coming down just as the riders were lining up on the starting line, which made for some crazy, slick, treacherous conditions. Knobbies on pavement isn't a good thing to begin with, and then add in a little bit of water, and you've got a definite problem. So, the guys weren't too anxious to get to the first turn. We got our multi-row start. We had Strang, Whibley, Canny, Mullins, and Budrick, which were the top 5 in points going on the first row. And Strang pulled the whole shot, if you want to call it that, even though there wasn't much of a race to the first turn. Then we had Jason Thomas, Chris Bach, Caleb Russell, and Stuart Baylor on the second row. And those guys all taking it easy as well, with Bach, pulling out in front there. And here comes second overall in last year's Snowshoe GNCC, Jesse Robinson. And yes, that is Jimmy Jarrett, who's back from his collarbone injury, along with Andrew DeLong, taking off. And here we go, Thad Duvall on row 4 with Jordan Ashburn and Scotty Watkins. Thad could be very dangerous from the fourth row with that elapsed time on his side. On the next row, we've got Rory Mead, the Kiwi, who was filling in for Jimmy Jarrett, but ended up getting to keep his ride, and Nick Farringer on the Husaberg. And a few miles in, it was Whibley jumping out to the lead. No surprise here, we got Nate Canny hot on his heels. Nate's always strong at Snowshoe. And Charlie Mullins, Josh Strang, Corey Buttrick, and then Thad Duvall, who was already up into the 5th place physically, starting so far back, was definitely going to be the leader. And then you see Mead just went by there as well. Jesse Robinson squeezing by Caleb Russell here, Stuart Baylor, and Andrew DeLong. So we had quite the freight train going here early. This shot here is about 10 miles in, where there was a shortcut and a long cut. And a bunch of guys decided to take the shortcut the first lap. It was pretty muddy section. You see Josh Strang here deciding to go around it, as well as Corey Buttrick going around it, and there's Rory Mead going around it as well. And it ended up, and we'll see later on in this shot, that this ended up being a big factor in the race. Because early on this was maybe a 20-second shortcut, maybe more, but with the risk of getting stuck and being stuck there for 2 minutes or more. So it's a risk-reward game there, and we'll show you later how that ended up panning out. Here near the end of the second loop, we've got Canny taking the lead physically, with Charlie Mullins second, Josh Strang third. So that would be your overall for the moment. Here comes Corey Buttrick, who also started on the front row, until this guy, Rory Mead, comes by, who started way back. And then he's got Thad Duvall behind him, along with Jordan Ashburn and Paul Whibley. So a little bit of a Yamaha deal going there. And after the first 3 laps, actually, Rory Mead was in the overall lead on time adjustment, but he was never actually physically in the lead. With Canny, Strang, and Mullins starting to pull a little bit of a gap over Corey Buttrick. Taking a look back to see who's behind him, and it's going to be Thad Duvall and Jordan Ashburn, who made some moves here, and along with Rory Mead. So Ashburn at that point was actually way up in the overall, and was obviously leading the XC2 over Stuart Baylor, who just went by ahead of Paul Whibley. But at some point something happened to Jordan. He was only able to finish 2 laps, and Stuart Baylor, the other young rider in the XC2 class, started to really make some moves there and move his way up. But it was Rory Mead leading all the laps early. But that, the time adjustment thing ends up being a huge factor. And here we see Baylor finally is getting around Jordan Ashburn, and at this point, Baylor is also starting to, become a factor in the overall as well. This is one of those gnarly races where, you know, the two-stroke could be the bike of choice. We saw Jesse Robinson do really well on it last year. And, you know, in these gnarly conditions where a four-stroke like that could maybe be overheating or be heavy, you know, the two-stroke has got enough power, nimble to get through the rocks and stuff. And Stewart was doing really well on it. But the story out front, actually leading the race, was Nate Canny. You know, Canny, privateer guy now, and the $5,000, I'm sure he could use it just as much as anyone, if not more than anyone out there. And he was pushing hard, but here we go. You can see Mullins and Mead following him through what would be the shortcut, what you would think would be the shortcut, which actually turned out to be the long cut, as you can see these guys struggling through it. And this is, you know, not the only time where some of the riders like Strang would go around it, but end up actually making time on the guys that were going through it, which is not exactly what you'd think, you know, taking the long cut. But, you know, that's just the risk you take in these sections like that. You can see Randy Hawkins here, who was waving guys through. We had a bunch of different riders out here helping each other out, and Wibbly coming through. And Wibbly, who led early, just could not find his groove late in the race. You know, after such a strong finish at Rock Run, he was back to another not-so-strong finish. And same with Thad Duvall, who was running up front early and just could not seem to keep his groove going. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. But a guy who did come on strong there at the end, you can see Nick Farringer coming through. And then last year's third overall finisher, second place in XC1, Chris Bach, who just also ended up running into some bike issues. He was able to finish all the laps, but he was pretty far off the pace. You see Jordan Ashburn kind of working his way back through, but you know, Jordan ended up not finishing the race on the lead lap there. So here we go. At some point, with just 2 laps to go, Charlie Mullins ends up taking the physical lead, with Rory Mead actually into second, and Josh Strang, the physical third-place bike on the track. And that would put Rory Mead at a pretty big lead at this point, but you know there's a lot of racing left to go. And as is often the case here at Snowshoe, you know things change up quite a bit. You know, Canny was actually the 4th physical bike, ends up coming through as the leader coming into the white flag. You know, Ricky Towery wasn't sure if it was going to be him, and we had reports on the radio that Stuart Baylor was actually in the lead at that point. But you can see Canny comes through with what ended up being over 30-second lead over Josh Strang, heading into the final loop on the south side of the mountain, the lower side of the mountain, down by the Silver Creek campground and stuff. And we were waiting, and finally here comes Josh Strang. And at this point, Canny would be the overall leader, and Strang would be second, because we were still waiting for Stuart Baylor, who comes in physically third, and that was the best we had seen Baylor come through throughout the race. And it was looking like it was going to be Canny's race to lose. You know, Rory Mead was so far behind that he, at this point, wasn't going to be in the physical lead. He would have been still on the overall podium, and then just a few miles later, here comes Canny. And that 30-second lead has shrunk substantially, as you can see. Here comes Baylor, who had made his way around Strang, and just a few, 10 seconds or so behind. We've got Baylor, who at this point would be your overall winner, with Strang following close behind. Mead trudging along, and Mead actually told me after the race was over that he's done all sorts of extreme races. He's done Erzberg, and the Snowshoe GNCC is the toughest race he's ever done, which is a pretty good testament to the difficulty of this race. And here we see Canny coming into the shortcut, Strang taking the long cut, and this would actually be the spot where Strang makes his pass for the lead. Canny, this section just got so worn out that the guys are having to go so slow to pick and choose their lines to not get buried up to their seat, and that ended up being the spot where the pass was made. Stuart Baylor also went around, and here we see Charlie Mullins, who put on a really strong push at the end, going for the shortcut, almost getting stuck, and has made the pass on Rory Mead, who fills in on camera with some mud, taking what was the shortcut as well. But coming into the finish, it was Josh Strang holding on for the win. His first ever podium at Snowshoe with the win, just barely over Nate Canny, the privateer. Charlie Mullins would come in third as the 3rd physical bike with the broken front fender, but it was Stuart Baylor, hot on his heels, who would end up taking the 3rd overall spot. 16 years old, almost winning the overall there, which is pretty impressive. And then Rory Mead coming in 4th. All right, let's take a look at our top 10 overall. It was Josh Strang, Nate Canny, Stuart Baylor, Charlie Mullins, Rory Mead in only his second GNCC ever, getting a 5th, Paul Whibley holding on to 6th, and Caleb Russell, who said after the race that he felt like he won the race with a 6th place in the XC1 Pro and a 7th place overall, just barely by just a couple tenths of a second over Nick Farringer, Corey Buttrick, and Jesse Robinson. In the XC1 Pro Lights class, obviously Josh Strang took the win over Canny and Mullins. Mead was 4th, and Whibley and Caleb Russell would bump up some from the Stuart Baylor not being in their class to 5th and 6th, Farringer 7th, Corey Buttrick 8th, Thad Duvall struggles to finish 9th, and Kenny Gilbert takes 10th spot. In the XC2 Pro Lights, we had Stuart Baylor taking the win over Jesse Robinson and Andrew DeLong, a KTM sweep of the top 4 spots, as Zach Nolan, big shout out to Zach, young kid from West Virginia, privateer, with what I think will probably be his best overall finish in the XC2 Pro Lights class with 4th, Scotty Watkins 5th, Zach Smith 6th, Morgan Moss 7th, 8th goes to our former XC2 Pro Lights champion Justin Williamson, AJ Stewart 9th, and the Danish rider Peter Weiss rounding out the top 10. And a name you won't see here on this is Jason Thomas, who ended up only finishing 2 laps, so that's going to put a big dent into his points chase. And speaking of those XC2 Pro Lights points, let's take a quick look. Stuart Baylor pulling out to a big lead over Thomas and DeLong, Robinson, and Brad Bakken, who ended up breaking his wrist last week at a National Enduro, is still holding on to 5th, but that probably won't last, with Scotty Watkins, Jordan Ashburn, Morgan Moss, Shane Ovinia, and Zach Smith rounding out the top 10 in the XC2 Pro Lights points. And with the win, Josh Strang pulls out to an 11-point lead over his championship rival Charlie Mullins. Paul Whibley, tough day at the office with a 5th, kind of slipping back in the points a little bit there. And the privateer, Canny, holding on to a strong 4th and moving in with Corey Buttrick, Caleb Russell, Chris Bach hot on his heels. And we've got Lafferty, Jimmy Jarrett, and Garrett Edmondson rounding out the top 10 in points. All right, folks, well, that's it for this edition of the Fly Racing GNCC post-race show on digitaloffroad.com. Sorry for the mix-up in format here. I know it's not ideal. We'll be coming back to you in full force from the John Penton GNCC with my wingman, Rodney Tomlin. So that's it. Look for us then, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.